Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, this is now episode 56 of the podcast, The Forward, with myself, Brother Matthew Locke, author of The Big Step. And today I want to take a closer look at John Taylor Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down. Now, he passed away about a month ago. I think it was October 25th. So I think it would be appropriate to go over his work, which is of, I would say, very, very high significance. And I also quoted it in my book, The Big Step, as I was laying out the framework of what is going on with Anglosphere Islam. So I thought before I go into the book review, because that's what it's based on, I actually wrote a book review on Dumbing Us Down way back in 2011, so we're January 2011, so we're looking at almost 8 years. So I thought what I would do is I would start off by reading the excerpt from The Big Step, where I mention John Taylor Gatto's book, and then we can dive into the review itself and get more details. So in my book, in The Big Step, on page 9, I start off, well, I'll start off, this is a middle discussion, but just to give you some context here. This paragraph starts, the great Egyptian scholar, Imam Muhammad Mutawalli al-Sha'rawi, may Allah have mercy on him, was asked about the apostasy ruling in Islam, i.e., why is it written in our law books that an apostate can be executed? His answer was that this ruling has more to do with people entering the faith than with people leaving it. The high maintenance. The apostasy ruling is there to disturb freeloaders, sob storytellers, hypocrites, charlatans, hippie savants, and so forth. The ruling also informs as to how we Muslims are to present the faith and call to it. We have to be forthright and honest. Faith. If you try to I'm trying to think of the right word here, but if you try to embellish Islam in some way, in an unnecessary false way, you try to sweeten it up in some way, and basically you only present to the person ABC of Islam. You don't show them DEF. What that means is later on they're going to find out about DEF and think, wait a second, I thought Islam was just ABC. I didn't know Islam was DEF as well. And then as a result, they could easily leave. They think, well, I was lied to, I was deceived, I was misled, and so forth. So in The Big Step, what I wrote was, we cannot water down our beliefs and laws in the hope that we can offer a form of Islam that is acceptable to the person being preached to. This is a lost cause. Even if this person does state the testimony of faith, there are two major problems. For starters, if this person has to be lied to in order to be convinced of the faith, it means he or she will be high maintenance. Secondly, it will only be a matter of time before this person discovers more about Islam on their own, realizes that it is not actually what they signed up for, and then they will leave. Convert recidivism is very real, or it's very real. And I put in footnotes later on in the book about this. To continue, Islam is for everyone, and it is not for everyone. It is offered to everyone, but not everyone is going to accept it. The Lord made this clear in Surah Al-A'raf, in the Quran, in Surah Al-A'raf, the 7th chapter, verse 172, when he had all of humanity testify that he is indeed their Lord. This is the ayah, Alastu bi Rabbikum, am I not your Lord? They testified in the affirmative, all of them, but, as Imam Ibn al-Jawzi points out in his commentary, not every single person was honest. Again, people can refer to this. There are the lessons in Imam Ibn al-Jawzi's tafsir. These are on the Reasons for Faith channel, taught by Al-Hajj Abu Ja'far al-Hanbali. So if you want to go into more detail on these ayats, then please do look into it. This is Surah Al-Araf, the 7th chapter, verse 172. So what the Imam said was, in fact, the majority lied. This is what he was saying. In fact, the majority lied. This is my paraphrasing of what he put in his tafsir. Whatever decision was made at that point in history is the decision that affects the life of every single human on this earth, in every place, in every time and place. If you testify that Allah is your Lord and you meant it, you will be saved. If you did not, you will not. The pen has been lifted and the ink has dried. Does that mean, therefore, that preaching the faith is pointless? No. We do not know who those people are. We do not know who meant it and who did not. There are people who are ostensibly, meaning outwardly, disbelievers right now, But they meant it. They meant it when Allah said, Aman, our Lord. They meant it. They said yes, and they meant it. And there are those who are ostensibly Muslim now, and they did not mean it. In the fourth hadith of his famous collection of 40 the Arba'in Nawawiyah, the fourth hadith, Imam Nawawi, may Allah be pleased with him, quotes the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, explaining that someone will do the actions of the people of paradise until there's only a cubit between him and it, and then what has been written will catch up with him, and he will become from the people of the fire and enter it. Likewise, there will be those who do the actions of the people of fire until there's only a cubit between them and the fire, and then what has been written will catch up with them, and they will become from the people of paradise and enter it. Therefore, we have to present the faith. That is not questioned. Secondly, we have to present the faith honestly and truthfully, with good manners, of course, but honestly and truthfully. That is what the Lord has commanded us to do in several verses in his book. For example, in Surah Yasin, the 36th chapter, in the 17th verse, Allah says, "And there's nothing upon us except the clear conveyance of the message." Yes, there's also reward if someone is guided to Islam through you, but we want quality, not quantity. How can there be reward if that same person leaves Islam a few weeks, months, or even years later? We want potential converts to fully grasp and understand what they are committing themselves to. Once that has been achieved, and we can be reassured that they will not feel deceived and tricked later on down the line, then we happily accept their testimony of faith, and whatever happens after that, we leave to Allah. Right? We do everything we can within our knowledge to ensure that this convert knows what Islam is about. He knows what he's signing up for, and then after that, we leave it to Allah. We've done what we can. We've covered what we're responsible for. We've done what is within our capacity, and then the rest is left up to Allah. The foolishness of rushing people to articulate testimony of faith will be discussed in the next chapter. Okay, so because we're still in chapter 1 here. Okay, following paragraph. When one's main motive for becoming a Muslim is conviction, conviction will be the main motive for every decision made thereafter. Are you going to be an Orthodox, i.e. Sunni Muslim, or are you going to join one of the cults? If you choose the former, you will then choose one of the 4 legal schools based on what you think is best for you, right? Whether you want to be a Shafi'i or a Maliki or a Hanbali or so forth. You won't change it depending on where you are or who you're with because you want to fit in and feel comfortable. Fitting in and feeling comfortable was not your motive for becoming Muslim in the first place. The presence of conviction or the lack thereof will also be visible in what spiritual path you join, aka a Sufi tariqah, or if you join one at all. To further understand this phenomenon, and especially in the Anglosphere, I would highly recommend the book, The True Believer, Thoughts on the Nature of Mass Movements by Eric Hoffer. The main thesis of this book by Eric Hoffer, and again, I'm going to mention this in a few minutes in the book, but I do have a review of this book on my blog, and this book, the content of this book dovetails very, very nicely with what John Taylor Gatto says in his book, right? Which I'm going to, inshallah, show in a couple of minutes. The main thesis, i.e. of Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, is that people join movements, whether it's religions, political parties, political activist organizations, spiritual brotherhoods, etc., because they fear an autonomous existence. In other words, these people are scared or do not have the confidence to live their lives on their own terms and to tell themselves what to do. They would much prefer to delegate that authority or indeed responsibility to someone else. Therefore, as Hoffer stresses, these people couldn't care less about the doctrines of the movement or group they belong to. What matters to them is that they belong to something. This also explains why you will see these people moving from group to group easily and even frequently, despite the doctrines being radically different. For example, someone might start in a political group with heretical Mu'tazilite theology and spend a great deal of their time talking about how the Muslim laity must restore the caliphate. You can guess who I'm referring to there. Sometime later, that same individual will have joined a Sufi tariqah and will be spending most of his time talking about how spiritual he feels and how amazing it is to go into a state of spiritual ecstasy every Thursday. A few years later, it would not be implausible to find that person amongst the ranks of Greenpeace. In 2011, I wrote a review of this book called Madness is Rare in Individuals, which includes the following. So now I'm quoting the review. The second matter is desire for substitutes. Hoffer explains that the difference between a mass movement and a practical organization is that the latter offers opportunities for self-advancement. Right? A practical organization offers opportunities for self-advancement, while the former satisfies the passion for self-renunciation. This is a constant theme throughout the book, which is that mass movements appeal to the fear of an autonomous existence, an existence in which one has to think for oneself, and of course, this dovetails nicely with the objectives of compulsory schools. Okay, and that's where, there's a link to there's a link in the book going back to the review. But where does this fear of an autonomous existence come from? Right. So this is where we're getting to the core of the matter of why John Taylor Gatto's book is so important. Where does this fear of an autonomous existence come from? Why do such people lack the confidence and willpower to tell themselves what to do? Why do they feel the need to refer and defer to experts, quote unquote? As this is a book about the Anglosphere, it would be wise to look at the educational system that is present in these countries. And the best and most concise description of what happens in the schools is found in John Taylor Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down. Now, I'm looking back at my words now. I'm thinking, well, I could have said one of the best. I don't know. I'm being quite subjective there. I mean, I'm saying from my experience, John Taylor Gatto's book is the best book in terms of its brevity and its length, how much it's able to cover and discuss, despite being a short book. In my view, it's the best book. But I'm sure there probably are more detailed books. I think even John Taylor Gatto himself has written longer books on the topic that describe the school system in the United States. Anyway, I digress. So, Gatto focuses less on the subject material. In his book, The Dumbing Us Down, he focuses less on the subject material that is taught in schools and more on the structures and methods that are employed, such as students being classified into age groups, classes starting and ending with bells, students being made to rely on their teachers for emotional and intellectual validation, and so forth. Several years ago, I wrote in my review of Gatto's book, entitled Western Mass Education, the following. So this is where I will, I think I'll stop at this point and then jump over into the my review itself. But what I said after I quoted the review, I said, so in the Anglosphere, much of Europe, children are raised to fear an autonomous existence, and this makes them easy prey, when talking about Muslim children, for the various organizations and cults that have free reign in such lands. I say free reign because many of these groups that have no hope of gaining any traction in the traditional Muslim heartlands, I don't have to mention names. You can guess who I'm talking about. There are several groups, political organizations, some rather radical extreme organizations, who they can't get any traction in the Muslim world. They're either going to be heavily suppressed by the government, or by and large rejected by the masses, or both. Right? And that's why I said their peoples by and large reject them and their governments clamp down on them. This phenomenon we discuss later in this book. We're talking about the growing divide between Islam itself and Anglosphere Islam. So, I hope that's clear up to this point. Let us delve now into the review itself. So the blurb, so what I bought here was the 2009 edition, published by New Society Publishers in Gabriel Island. And the blurb says this is the 2009 edition. 30 years of award-winning teaching in New York City's public schools led John Gatto to the sad conclusion that compulsory government schooling has nothing to do with education, doing little but teach young people to conform to the economy and the social order. Dumbing Us Down reveals a shocking reality of today's school system and has become a beacon for parents seeking alternatives to it. This edition celebrates the fact that the book continues to be highly relevant in setting the agenda for a complete overhaul of how we educate our children and for what. And then there's a description of the author. The author, John Taylor Gatto, is an internationally renowned speaker who lectures widely on school reform. He taught for 30 years in public schools before resigning on the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal. During the year, he was named New York State's official Teacher of the Year. On April 3rd, 2008, the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard credited Mr. Gatto with adding the expression, dumbing us down, to the school debate worldwide. And as I mentioned, he passed away about a month ago, so I believe he's well into his 80s. So that's what we should bear in mind. So obviously when I wrote it, he was alive when I wrote this review. So since its first publication in 1992, John Taylor Gatto's damning exposure of compulsory schooling, not quote-unquote education, in America has sold over 150,000 copies, and by writing this book review, I would like to see that number rise further. Because again, I highly recommend this book. People should definitely read Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto to understand what are your children being exposed to, and it's getting worse with time in terms of the structure, not also the structures and the methods, but the content is getting worse with time, and that's again that's a whole other discussion. That's a whole other podcast that I could do. Because the information this rather book contains opens one's eyes and explains why school, especially in America, but also Canada and the United Kingdom, was a miserable experience for so many of us and is now a miserable experience for our children. Furthermore, we can't actually recall what we were taught that was of any benefit. And this is the thing. Like, really, if you ask, my experience, again, I'm being subjective again here, but if you ask anyone, what do you remember from school? Most people remember maybe one or two teachers that really stood out from the system. And they were really good teachers despite the system. And they sort of had a passion for the subject. They had a passion for learning, or for teaching. They had a passion for their students learning. And they went out of their way to make sure that you as a student actually enjoyed learning and that you benefited from whatever course it was you were taking. But by and large, people don't remember things. You know, I was watching a video on YouTube recently. It was a guy presenting the news, and he said, you know, I remember I graduated from high school. I didn't even know how to write a check. I mean, there's so many basic practical skills that you come out of it at the age of 18. There's so many basic skills that you don't even have. You've been going to this building 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 12, 13 years, and you don't know how to write a check. You don't know how to change a flat tire. You don't know how to book a flight. You don't know how to, renew your passport. There's all these little basic things, day-to-day things that you need to know how to do. You don't know how to do them. What were they teaching you all these years? They don't teach you economics. They don't teach you how the government works. They don't teach you, it's like there was a recently a lady in America who was recently, she was actually elected into the House of Representatives, and she doesn't even know how the government works. She used the expression that the three chambers of government in the United States. The House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House, like the three chambers of government. I was like, no, they're three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, the judiciary. The legislative branch has two chambers. The House of Representatives, the Senate. The White House represents the executive branch. I mean, I'm not even American. I can figure this stuff out. But this is what we're learning. This is what we're seeing now. What are these people learning in school? You're going to school for all those years. It's a government school, and you're not even taught how your own government works. Something to think about. Anyway, carrying on. The 2009 edition includes a brilliant foreword by Thomas More, who mentions that Gatto's understanding of education is that it should include the community. So, quoting Thomas More, he says, John Gatto makes the important point that a community needs old people and children mixing together. For Muslims, that's the end of the quote, he's not talking about Muslims. For Muslims, this is extremely relevant for a number of reasons. First of all, it is very common in Muslim households throughout the world to find three generations living under one roof. One of the benefits of this is that the children can benefit directly from their grandparents. For example, while the father is at work, the son can spend his time with his grandfather, who is most likely retired after living a long life of experiences and stories. Also, in addition to being retired, the grandfather is approaching the end of his life and is preparing himself to meet his Lord. So he is devoting more of his time to supererogatory acts of worship such as extra fasting, night prayers, and recitation of the Quran. Think of the benefit that the grandchildren obtain by watching their grandparents doing these things, by watching them in this state. What better education could there be for children at that age? So there's a huge reminder right there. You're a child and you're part of a community, you're part of a larger family. You're seeing your grandparents preparing to leave this world. And that's a reminder that, yes, I'm young, but I'm not going to live forever. And one day I'm going to be in that situation if Allah allows me to live that long. As a second point, Muslim institutions of learning have never, up until the colonial age, categorize their students according to age, i.e., the grade classification system. How can children grow, develop, and mature when they are constantly around their own age group? As a former school teacher in the UK, I myself have seen children behave horribly while at school, but then behave the complete opposite later that day while attending a class with adults at a community center. And this is true because this refers to back when I was living in Nottingham over a decade ago. I used to see that. I used to teach at a day school. And you see boys together, they're all the same age, and their behavior is completely out of control. But then you take them to a community center, and they're in the presence of adults and people of various ages, and they're behaving themselves. Something to think about. To continue with the review. The book itself is a collection of 5 lectures and essays delivered and or written by Gatto. The first lecture is called The 7-Lesson School Teacher, in which Gatto explains the 7 lessons that teachers actually teach. The first is confusion. How is this so? Gatto says, everything I teach is out of context. I teach the unrelating of everything. I teach disconnections. In other words, it's all information with no meaning. Gatto states, I teach the unrelating of everything, an infinite fragmentation, the opposite of cohesion. What I do is more related to television programming than to making a scheme of order. In a world where home is only a ghost because both parents work, or because of too many job changes or too much ambition, or because something else has left everybody too confused to maintain a family relation, I teach students how to accept confusion as their destiny. That's the first lesson I teach. Right? Now, confusion is chaos. Chaos leads to stress. So children are constantly in a state of stress. They don't know what's coming, what's going. It's very hard to identify any sort of order because nothing is connected. Nothing is in context. This is the first lesson of schooling. The second, or the first lesson. The second is class position, i.e. teaching children their place in society. The third is indifference, in which children are taught not to care too much about anything. Gatto makes an interesting point about bells. He says this, Gatto says, indeed, the lesson of bells is that no work is worth finishing. So why care too deeply about anything? Years of bells will condition all but the strongest to a world that can no longer offer important work to do. Bells are the secret logic of school time. Their logic is inexorable. You can't escape it. Bells destroy the past and the future, rendering every interval the same as any other. As the abstraction of a map renders every living mountain and river the same, even though they are not, bells inoculate each undertaking with indifference. And again, I know this as well, being a school teacher. You want to give students an assignment. You want to say, okay, I want you to complete this. I want you to complete this exercise or complete this fill in the blank, whatever it is that you want them to do. And they look at the clock and they think, oh, wait a second. The bell's going to ring in 5 minutes. Oh, just chill out, relax a bit, right? And that's it. All they'll do is, when you're looking at them, they'll hold their pencil, pretend to be doing something. Well, as soon as you look away, they'll put the pencil down, sit back, and they're just biding their time, waiting. Oh, good. 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left. Then the bell goes, they get up and leave. They don't care because they're already inculcated with this understanding that I'm just here to fill time. That's how a lot of kids view it. I'm not here to learn and benefit and gain something. I'm just here to bide my time. Right? There's only 5 minutes left, so why bother? Right? I'll just sit back and wait a bit, daydream, and then the bell will go, and then I'll leave. And I think it's also worth mentioning, because I put it here, isn't it interesting that in the Muwatta of Imam Malik and Sahih Muslim and other collections, there's the hadith, the angels do not accompany a group that has a dog or a bell. Again, something to think about. Now, here we get into the key thing of what I quoted in the big step. The fourth and fifth lessons are emotional dependency and intellectual dependency. The first is a direct attack against individuality. Pupils are not allowed to express any form of individuality, but instead must conform to the system. As for the latter, intellectual dependency, Gatto says this is the most important lesson of them all. We must wait for other people, better trained than ourselves, to make the meanings of our lives. Please see the article below, The Religiosity and Idolatry of the Anthropogenic Global Warming Movement, and that's linked below. Um, yes, that reminds me. Now, I did get some feedback. Some people have sent me comments on my blog, and some people have just asked me in person. Because I do mention in my book about climate change and how what's referred to as climate change, which basically means anthropogenic global warming, which means human beings are the main cause, namely through CO2 emissions, that human beings are the main cause of temperature changes throughout the world. And I refer to it as a fraud. And people get in touch with me and say, "Oh, how can you not believe in climate change?" Oh, no, 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 hold on. Step back and look at the language being used, and you have to look at you know the book in context here. You have to look. You have to read the whole. I mean, you have to read at least the whole chapter in context to see what I'm actually saying. Now, let's talk about climate change. Does the climate change? Yes. And the proof is obvious. We have something called the Little Ice Age, which happened in Europe in the 1600s, when much of Europe was a lot colder than what it is now. We also had the medieval warming period, where it was possible in southern England to grow wine, to produce wine, which is proof that 1,000 years ago, southern England had what we call now a Mediterranean climate, a climate like that of Spain or Greece or Italy. The climate changes. Now, the proof that, and remember, these changes were happening, warming, heating, before industrialization, before the invention of the steam engine, before coal factories, or sorry, coal power, I should say, before airplanes, before cars. The other thing to bear in mind, and this is why my book I put it in this like this. I said that you have the sort of the conspiracy theory of the right and the conspiracy theory of the left, or the con of the right and the con of the left. On the right side, you've got the war on terror thing, right? The war on terror, and which always talks about security, security, security. We need to protect you. We need to protect you. We need to protect you. Therefore, we need to have the TSA at airports. People need to be monitored. People need to be checked. And that's why you can find several videos on YouTube of people talking about how they've been touched inappropriately while going through airport security in the United States. Right? They've been molested. They've been fondled. And it's not a pleasant experience. But there's all this stress on security, security, security. We have to protect you from the terrorists. And then on the left side of the political spectrum, it's all about the carbon footprint. That you need to reduce what you're consuming. You need to reduce how much energy you consume. Don't travel so much. Try not to use a car. Try not to use an airplane. Don't use electricity. Turn your lights. All these things. But what you see when you compare, say, the war on terror con with the climate change con, which really should be called the anthropogenic global warming con, because climate change is true, the climate changes, is that the objectives are the same. The objective is larger government, less freedom. The objectives are the same thing. We have to have a carbon tax. That's what the left will say. We need a carbon tax to fight global warming. The right, the war on terror people will say we need to limit air travel. We need to have more intrusions into people. We need to have more intrusions, more security checks when people are traveling, because they talk about we need to have body scanners at not just airports, but train stations, bus stations, and so forth. And you'll notice this, for example, like I read, and when they refute each other, they always go back to their argument. I'll give you an example. I think what's his name? David Ray Griffin, in his book The New Pearl Harbor, where he completely debunks the the official narrative of what happened on 9/11, September 11, 2001. It's several hundred pages, that book. I think it's at least 300 pages. So he goes through all the sources, goes through all the evidence, shows how the official story does not add up, and then he says right at the end of the book, he says, "Isn't it a shame that we're spending all this money and all these resources trying to fight this war on terror, which isn't based on anything. It's all a lie, blah, 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 when we could be putting all those resources towards solving a real problem like global warming. See? That's what he says. Then you go to someone like, on the other side of the spectrum, someone like Viscount Monkton, who is he's like the arch nemesis of Al Gore, who's been, I don't think he's written a book, but he's done several presentations about, the falsehood of the global warming scare. At the end of I saw one of his presentations, one of his lengthy presentations, and at the end of the presentations, he said the exact same thing, but he just swapped the terms around. He said, here we are spending all this money, all these resources, trying to combat this non-problem of global warming, when really we should be spending it on the war on terror. As you can see, so it's a false dichotomy. Then you go into further details, and you can see the hypocrisy of it. So, for example, on the left, when it comes to, say, climate change and global warming, why are all these people like especially Al Gore, and there's other celebrities like there's actors and singers, but Al Gore especially, he's seen as like the godfather of the movement. What was it? I read an article recently. His energy consumption is something like 18 times. I forget the actual figure now, but I read an article recently about this. I looked it up. His energy consumption, because he owns several homes, his energy consumption massively dwarfs the average American's energy consumption. Gas, electricity, and so forth. It massively dwarfs it. These people. So what these people do, people like Al Gore, these other actors and singers and celebrities, they fly around the world in private jets, emitting ridiculous amounts of carbon in order to go to events and fill out and stadia and so forth, and say to the little people like you and me, you consume too much. You need to hold back. You need to restrict yourself. Don't fly. Don't take too many flights. Try not to use your car. I'm like, hold on a second. I use maybe 0.5% of the energy that you use in 1 year. It's just ridiculous. I mean, obviously that's not an exact figure. I'm just trying to give you an example here. But the hypocrisy is clear. Al Gore also owns like seafront property in San Francisco. All right, he owns property right where he says that the sea level will rise and flood that area. It doesn't add up. Now, see, if Al Gore were to move into a yurt and live, the life of a hermit, and trying to and basically completely give up modern technology and just not use any electricity, not use any gas, and just live a really, really, I would say maybe monastic lifestyle, then I might take him seriously. Then I might think, maybe there's something to this. But his actions do not show that he's genuinely concerned about the problem. And the same goes for all these celebrities, these actors, these singers, and politicians as well. They're not giving up their fancy lifestyles. And this is a point that Jordan Peterson made recently when he visited Cambridge University, because someone stood up and asked that question, like, couldn't climate change be this issue that unites us all together? And he said that, but people don't generally care about it. That was the point he made. He was a very clever answer, because people always try to put into that, are you pro or are you anti? But he just said people don't generally care about it. So it's like okay, so if you genuinely care about carbon emissions, are you going to stop using your iPhone? Are you going to get rid of your laptop? Are you going to live like an electricity-free life? No, you're not. You're not going to. So it's not on any list of priorities. But anyway, that's the left side. Look at the right side of the argument, the war on terror people. Here's a question. Why is it that the current president of the United States is the only one who's really, really concerned about border security? He's the only one who says we need to have a wall on the border. We need to have proper barriers to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in. Why is he concerned? How come the last Republican president, who was there from 2000 to 2008, who put forward this whole war on terror narrative, and kept stressing security and kept stressing I need to protect the American people. So he was going through all that. I don't know what to say here, but he was stressing that narrative so much and telling people or insisting that we need to have security at airports, people need to be checked and triple checked, and we have to protect the American people from the terrorists. He was doing all that and saying all that and putting out all that rhetoric, while at the same time the southern border was in large part porous. So how concerned with security were they? How can you be concerned with security? How can you be concerned with security? It's like, how can you be concerned with, for example, with neighborhood security when you don't lock your own door at night? It doesn't make sense. So the hypocrisy of both the right and the left is what I'm getting at. That's what I address in my book. People have to look deeper into this. These are manufactured causes. There's the manufactured cause on the left. There's the manufactured cause on the right. And you take a slightly, less than superficial look. Instead of looking superficially at the matter, you look at it a bit deeper, and you see that both sides are just full of hypocrisy. They're not genuinely concerned about these causes that they say they're so concerned about. And Allah knows best. Sorry to go off on that tangent. Anyway, that's what I meant by the religiosity and idolatry of the AGW movement. There's a link there. You can look at it yourself. Okay. To continue with the review, is it any wonder that so many of these brainwashing organizations exist and are flourishing in the West, from Greenpeace to Salafia and a whole host of Sufi tariqas? As Gatto says, good people wait for an expert to tell them what to do. It is hardly an exaggeration to say that our entire economy depends on this lesson being learned. Think of what might fall apart if children weren't trained to be dependent. The social services could hardly survive. They would vanish, I think, into the recent historical limbo out of which they rose. Counselors and therapists would look on in horror as the supply of psychic individuals, like psychologically ill individuals, or invalids, vanished. Commercial entertainment of all sorts, including television, would wither as people learned again how to make their own fun. Restaurants, the prepared food industry, and a whole host of other assorted food services will be drastically downsized if people return to making their own meals rather than depending on strangers to plant, pick, chop, and cook for them. Much of modern law, medicine, and engineering would go too, as well as the clothing business and school teaching, unless a guaranteed supply of helpless people continue to pour out of our schools each year. We've built a way of life that depends on people doing what they are told because they don't know how to tell themselves what to do. Okay, this is a brilliant point. I would also recommend at this point, if you have some time, just look up GDP, gross domestic produce or product. Look it up, because this is the measure that people use for an economy. And how does it go again? It's measured in terms of consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. And the point you look at GDP, they talk about GDP in terms of it. GDP goes up the more money you spend. So what this means is that the more dependent you are, the better it is for the economy. So if you cut your own hair at home, that's not good for the economy. If you pay someone else to cut your hair, it's good for the economy. If you make your own food at home, that's not so good for the economy. But if you go out to a restaurant and you pay someone else to make food for you, that's good for the economy because you're consuming. And it also sort of instills this idea that something is only valuable if it can be monetized. There are other issues with GDP, but I don't want to go into that now. But that's part of the reason why this is pushed. I mean, this whole economic model is based on dependency. It's based on you being dependent on so many people to get through your life, whether it's counselors, therapists, teachers, cooks, chefs, whatever it is, farmers. You have to be dependent on so many people. The last two lessons are provisional self-esteem, so that children's evaluation of themselves is based on certified officials as opposed to parents, families, and friends. And one can't hide. That's the last lesson. One can't hide. So that children can be groomed into accepting constant surveillance throughout their lives. In the next chapter, The Psychopathic School, Gatto enumerates 8 pathologies of the children he teaches, which are: they are indifferent to the adult world, they have almost no curiosity, they have a poor sense of the future, they are ahistorical, i.e., they have no understanding of how the past has affected the present, they are cruel to each other, they are uneasy with intimacy or candor, they are materialistic, and last but not least, they are dependent, passive, and timid in the presence of new challenges. Is this really what we want for our children? To fix this, Gatto suggests independent study, community service, adventures and experience, large doses of privacy and solitude, 1,000 different apprenticeships, the one-day variety or longer. These are all powerful, cheap, and effective ways to start a real reform of schooling. In other words, education should be taken out of the hands of so-called experts who really know nothing about children education and be put back into the hands of families and communities. And again, this is the sad fact. You look at some children, think of children you know, and think of what they were like before they went to school and what they were like afterwards. Like, so before they went to school, they were full of life, they were curious, they asked so many questions, they were excited about everything. And then they go to school and they come back and they're cynical, they're moody, they have an attitude problem, right? They just sulk all the time. Oh, so what? That's how they respond to it. You ask them anything like, oh, so what? That's basically their attitude. And this is exactly what he says here, John Gatto. They are indifferent to the adult world. They have no curiosity, poor sense of the future, and so forth. So instead of sending them to school, why not engage them in apprenticeships or let them shadow people? For example, you could send your child to a bakery for the morning, or a fire station, or any other shop or business or a farm, just to see how people get things done in the world. See adults in action, because what are you ultimately doing with education? You're preparing your child for the adult world. You're preparing your child to be an adult. So why not have your child spend as much time with adults as possible? It's just common sense, but we don't think about that. We think, no, you send your kid to school to be surrounded by people his or her own age, and to be taught, or quote unquote taught, or supervised by complete strangers. You don't know who they are. Anyway, moving on. The third chapter, entitled The Green Monongahela, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I'm probably butchering it. This chapter includes the beautiful story of a girl called Milagros, a student of Gatto's, who was a brilliant reader but put in a low-level reading class because the administration, quote-unquote, had deemed that was her place. So that's what can happen to someone, right? So she's actually a brilliant reader, but she's put in a low-level reading class because that's where the administration has placed her. That's what they think. That's where they think she should be. After much struggle, Gatto finally managed to get her into the advanced reading class, and that same girl went on to become an award-winning teacher herself. Right? So this shows how the administration will actually keep people back, hold them down, and not let them fulfill their potential. Very, very. I mean, the story itself is happy, but it could have been a very, very sad story very easily. The fourth chapter is called We Need Less School, Not More, in which Gatto says no one survives these places. This is a really important point. No one survives these places with their humanity intact. Not kids, not teachers, not administrators, and not parents. He then goes on to discuss the key differences between communities and networks. A community is a place in which people face each other over time in all their human variety, good parts, bad parts, and all the rest. Such places promote the highest quality of life possible, lives of engagement and participation. Networks, on the other hand, divide people and make them feel lonely because they are inhuman mechanisms. Belonging to various networks eventually makes one feel alone in the middle of a crowd. For further discussion of this matter, read this article by Malcolm Gladwell, How Human is Facebook Really? And this is the point. I don't remember the content of this article right now, but this is the point that, you know, people you meet on social media aren't, and they're called friends. They're not really friends. You know, a Facebook friend. They're not really friends. They don't know you. They just see pictures of you and little snippets of your life, little facts about you. You know, today I went here. Today I went there. Today I had a class. Tomorrow I'm going to work. Whatever it is. There's one story I read about a woman who had, I think, hundreds of Facebook friends, if not thousands. And then she made a plea for help because she felt suicidal. So she actually said, "I'm going to end my life, and I can't carry on anymore. I want to die now." And she posted a message on Facebook. No one took an interest, and she took her life. So we want communities. We don't want networks. Networks are okay for work, to know people and to get, you want to find work connections and so on and forth. I know there's benefits, but that's not the same. That doesn't replace a community. Communities where people actually know each other and genuinely care about each other. The final chapter is called The Congregational Principle, in which the author condemns the idea of central planning and explains how the early European settlers in New England were congregationalists and strictly individualistic. Each congregation has its own way. Each congregation has its own way of raising and educating children, and even with each congregation had, I should say, its own way of raising and educating children. And even within each congregation, there was a lack of uniformity. This allows for people to do their own reading and research, but still within set parameters. Orthodox Islam, Sunnah wal Jama'ah, have the set parameters of the four madhabs and the creedal disciplines of the Hanbalis, Ash'aris, and Maturidis, while it is cults like the Salafis that advocate central planning and one right way of doing things. Right? We have to have uniformity, and this is the huge difference if you look at it between Orthodox Islam and cults and groups. And that's why I say here, central planning always stunts and numbs people because it prevents them from growing and developing naturally. And this reminds me of, I saw this recent interview with Jordan Peterson, and I don't want to mention her name. It was GQ magazine, but they had this feminist, and he mentioned this point about, how do you know someone is ideologically possessed, and how you know if someone is ideologically possessed is when once you've heard their opinion, once they've stated their opinion on one issue, you know exactly what they're going to say on every other issue. So it's this horrible uniformity all the way across and top to bottom. What I mean by that is, you meet one person, you find out their opinion, you hear their opinion on one issue. Now you know their opinion on every other issue. You know what they're going to say on every other issue. What are they going to say about taxes? What are they going to say about gender? What are they going to say about law such and such? You know exactly what they're going to say about all these things. And then you also know that everyone else within that organization is going to say the exact same thing. Right? So once you've met one of them, once you've heard one opinion, you've heard every opinion. And once you've met one of them, you've met every single one of them. Once you've met one person from the organization, you've met every single member of that organization. Right? So you're no longer talking to an individual. You're talking to an NCP, right? Or NPC. You're talking to a non-playable character. You're talking to someone who's basically been programmed. You're talking to an ideology, and that's not what we want. That's what you find. You find that with cults. You find that with certain spiritual organizations. It is quite creepy. You meet one person from the organization and you've met them all. They all sound exactly the same. They even have the same intonation of their voice sometimes, but it's the exact same talking points, the exact same opinions, and our leader said it, our sheikh said it, and that's it. And so these people are not individuals. And again, this is the point I'm making in this article: is why do people fall into that trap? Again, it goes back to this fear of autonomous existence. This fear of taking on responsibility, this fear of actually thinking for oneself and telling oneself what to do. So, Imam Muhammad Sayyid al-Balti, in his great work Fiqh al-Sirah, explains why the prohibition of alcohol. This is an example I was giving in the review. Explains why the prohibition of alcohol in Islam worked, and why it failed miserably when the U.S. government tried to do it from 1919 to 1933. The key is that the love of Allah and His Messenger, may Allah bless him, grant him peace, was planted firmly into the hearts of the companions first, so when the prohibition came, they readily and willingly accepted it. In the U.S., the love of alcohol hadn't been removed from the people's hearts, so they resorted to clandestine methods of acquiring booze, which led to the formation of bootlegging syndicates and people like the notorious gangster Al Capone. Grassroots, family-based and or community-based education produces genuine, long-lasting changes in people, whereas government education and moralizing Planned from central headquarters and issued from the top always fails miserably. And this goes back to something you read in economics. Thomas Sowell always makes a point about what's called third-party decision making. Third-party decision making, where decisions are made by someone who has absolutely no stake in the outcome. They are not going to be affected by the outcome one way or the other. The decision should be made at a local level, or as much of a local level as possible. That's where decisions should be made. Decisions should be made by the people who will actually be affected by them, not some faceless bureaucrat hundreds or thousands of miles away. In conclusion, Muslims living in the US, UK, or Canada, and other countries in the Anglosphere should consider the options of homeschooling or founding their own schools. In addition to the harms and dangers that Gatto mentions in his book, we should also be aware of the content that is taught. This is something that should be obvious. The beliefs and values that are being inculcated, such as atheism, secularism, evolution theory, the unity of all religions, and other brands, forms, and doctrines of kufr. It shouldn't come as any surprise that our great scholars and jurists, such as Imam ibn al-Hajj, the great Maliki, Imam Yusuf ibn Bahani, the great Shafi, and Imam Ahmed al-Shakir, the great Hanafi, have declared impermissible for Muslims to send their children to such schools. And their ruling is the consensus of the Ummah. And these books are quoted below. The prohibition of sending, there's the Madkhal by Ibn al-Hajj. Al-Madkhal, there's a chapter called the prohibition of sending Muslim children to Muslim children to Christian schools. And there's the Tahrir al-Muslimin and Mudaras al-Nasara by this Imam Yusuf ibn Bahani. And then there's also Imam Ahmed Shakir's book, Al-Khawatir fi Ta'aleem. And these people are talking about, they're saying you shouldn't send your children to Christian schools. What about schools that are teaching us open atheism or teaching, or just rejecting religion altogether? These are serious things to take into consideration about what are your children being inculcated with. Final paragraph. The consensus of our scholars should be enough to dissuade us from sending our children to these schools. But for people who may think that it is pragmatic or practical or even beneficial to do such a thing to their children, Gatto's work should leave them in no doubt as to what is the best option for them. Furthermore, for Muslims who think it would be a good idea to borrow the Western model and call it Islamic, quote unquote, when setting up their own schools, Gatto's work comes as a stark warning and admonition. It is not just the content of these schools' curricula that is the problem. The methods and means used are also damaging, and with Allah alone is every success. And there are some links after that, like where to get the book from, the publisher, directly from the publisher, from Amazon US, Amazon UK. So that's the end of the review. I hope you guys found it beneficial, and I hope you can see, why I quoted it in my book, The Big Step. But this book does explain a lot. It's very important in terms of for parents to understand how to raise your children, educate your children. But this book goes a long way towards understanding why Islam in the Anglosphere is the way it is, and why Muslims have found themselves sucked into so many organizations. Why Muslims have such a weird relationship. I didn't go into this in a lot of detail in the review, but you can see why, for example, Muslims have such a weird relationship with the mainstream media, for example. How Muslims, this is something I repeat over and over again in The Big Step, but why, for example, do Muslims, on the one hand, they always criticize the media, and they always blame the media and say it's the media's fault. The media always portrays us as fundamentalists and radicals and extremists and so on and so forth, and then they take our statements out of context, and it's so unfair, and people have such a bad impression of Islam because of the media. But at the same time, your typical Anglosphere Muslim believes what he or she is told by the mainstream media. Your average Anglosphere Muslim, will be pro EU, pro European Union. They will be they'll believe in quote unquote climate change. They'll agree with it, right? They'll call it climate change. So they'll even take on the phrases and expressions that the mainstream media uses. They'll just adopt them, use them without question. The right wing is bad, right? Being on the left is good. They'll just accept it normally. There's this weird cognitive dissonance going on. So it's like, on the one hand, the media is terrible, but at the same time, they should be believed. Everything they say outside of Islam, and whenever they talk about anything other than Islam, they have to be believed 100%. a lot of this has to do with the schooling system, this idea of deferring to experts, not questioning authority, but, just going with the flow, and so on and so forth. So, inshallah, that's enough. I've talked for a long time now. My voice feels hoarse now. So, in conclusion, of course, I've mentioned this before, that if you want to support this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also get a copy of The Big Step. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Lulu. There's a discount, 10% discount on the Lulu site. And I also hope that you get a copy of Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. He also has a YouTube channel that you can check out, see more of his videos and lectures. Lots and lots of useful information there. And may Allah guide us all towards the truth, and towards having a better understanding of his faith, and towards being better parents and better teachers. And with Allah alone is every success. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.